guys started with the Q&A today. I know, it's very strange.
This room feels too big.
I know, right?
Perfect day.
Do you guys have any questions related to writing or things you've struggled with or things you'd like to know or learn more about?
So I'm
Yes.
trying to I cannot English today.
That's
Good
okay.
glory.
That's okay. If you need a minute, that's okay.
Copyrighted words.
You mean like copyrighted terms?
Well, like, you know how with ASMRs.
Yes, so terms.
Yeah, I'm
Yeah.
trying to find one for like Dragonborn, but every time
Mhm.
I look for one, I just come up with it's copyrighted, and I'm not sure how to find if something is copyrighted. I guess.
Best thing you can do is just do a quick Google search. At this point, most of Google will tell you yes or no. Just put in the word and then say, is it copyrighted? And then it will pop
And I've
up.
tried to do that, but it's very ambiguous. It's
True.
just like,
That's
it is,
because of
but
the
it
fact
isn't.
that I have looked into Dragonborn. It is technically copyrighted as a term. However, there are things called public domain. That's when, if you're running into vague ones, you should look up, is it in the public domain? Because of the fact that technically, for example, the story of the Invisible Man is copyrighted. That is 100% originally his. I think it's H.G. Wells, but I could be wrong. It is 100% his concept, the Invisible Man. No one else can take that. Dracula, also 100% his concept. No one else can take that. Except, you've probably noticed, there are lots of Dracula retellings. There are lots of bits of Dracula in stories. There are lots of retellings of invisible people and invisible men. That's because it's now in the public domain. So, it can be copyrighted, but also in the public domain, which is why you sometimes get those vague answers. Dragonborn is one of those concepts where I believe it is technically in the public domain, because the first time that it was ever coined was a long, long, long time ago in a fantasy novel no one even remembers. No offense to the person who wrote that. But, like, genuinely, I remember being like, I've never heard of that novel, when I saw what novel it originally appeared in. So, that one I do believe is in the public domain. However, if you wanted to just make up your own name, I would highly recommend it, purely because of the fact that it has become so saturated with D&D content that people might think that you're just stealing from D&D, in spite of the fact that you are not. It is not copyrighted. It is copyrighted, but it is in the public domain, so you're perfectly well within your rights to use it. Does that make sense?
Okay. But how would you like create words?
Creating your own names for mythical creatures / characters. Excellent question. If you're going with names for people, I would highly recommend looking up just a bunch of different crazy fun names from other cultures and then being like, I like this one and that one and squish. Whereas with mythical creatures, I would say that that's another great way to do it, but also think about in your culture how they are viewed and how they are seen. Because of the fact that that is going to depict how we talk about them, right? If they are seen as evil and bad, they may have a very like grotesque sounding name because everyone's like, that horrible thing over there. Whereas if they are seen as very normal and in fact very average, then they might have a much more plain name like Lizard Folk or like the Reptilian Kingdom or I don't know. Point being that you can give it its own original name while still lending creed to how the society treats them. Kind of thinks like Civil War times. With Civil War times, you could tell who appreciated slaves and who did not appreciate slaves, because those who were super against slavery would be like, hey, they're an African American. And those who were super pro-slavery would be like, yeah, all those terrible slang words, right? And so in some ways, that is the best way to create another name for your culture, is figure out how your culture views them, and then figure out what would be good, either negative slang terms if they're negative, or positive ways of phrasing it if they are viewed positively. I'm not sure, was that helpful?
That was.
Okay, good. Sometimes I just start talking and then I realize, like, I'm not sure if that was helpful or not. All right, any other questions? Otherwise, like I said, I do have a list of generic questions that I can go off of.
Yeah, I just don't want to talk the whole time, so if you have any.
I don't have any.
Okay.
Yeah, I do have a couple more. Sorry.
Go for it.
I'm asking like 100 questions.
It's okay, that's what this is for.
What about names of places?
Names of places. My favorite method is still the method that Jennifer A. Nielsen gave. And yes, she gave this at a writing conference, so you're perfectly more than welcome to use it because it was a writing conference. So clearly she did not care if other people used it. But Jennifer A. Nielsen did admit that the way she came up with the name Carthia, which sounds like a very cool name for a country, right? She literally just went blah, 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 on the keyboard and then went take out that letter, add in this letter, take out that letter. That looks good. And that is a good way to do it because then you are doing something organically rather than being like it comes from this specific religion or it comes from this specific culture, because then you gotta kind of try to explain why all of your words sound Chinese or something like that. And it's like China doesn't exist in this world, but somehow the whole language sounds Chinese. That's a little confusing sometimes. You can also invent your own language if you really want to go that hardcore, but that's like J.R.R. Tolkien's method. You don't have to do that. He was also a professor of like history and language though, so that was kind of his thing. He was a little bit of an uber nerd.
So, but if you did want to make your own language, like, would you have to make a whole language, or could it be okay if like you made a few phrases?
Absolutely acceptable if you make a few phrases. There's actually this, oh man, I wish I could remember what it was called because I lost it the second it started to come to my head. There is this science fiction TV show / book. I can't remember what it is called for the life of me all of a sudden. But he actually has a lot of slang terms and slang words and various tidbits of language in his writing and in the TV show. Because of the fact that technically it's in the future, right? And so in the future, obviously, they'd have other languages, other terms, and things like that. And so he basically has a bunch of terms and things that he will use throughout the thing. That being said, the only issue that you'll run into with that is that if you are going to make up words and make up languages, you gotta keep a glossary of all of your made up word and languages so that way you don't accidentally make up a new word for one that already has a word. And even though that's acceptable, lots of languages have thesaurus words, you know. It's just important for the continuity of the book and the ease of the person reading it. I would also recommend if you are going to make up your own language that you don't have whole conversations in that language, because most people won't memorize it. If you are going to do whole conversations, just be like, they said in blank language, and then have it in English.
Okay.
That way it's easier for the person reading.
Would it be okay if it's like a couple of sentences and then, I don't remember.
I would probably say a couple words. A couple sentences is going to make the reader start to get lost. You can do a couple sentences in the language, just keep in mind that's a lot more high fantasy, epic fantasy concept. And so if you're going for more of an average fantasy concept, that's going to be hard for your readers to digest because they're sitting there going, oh, all of a sudden this became an epic fantasy novel and I have to memorize all of these terms.
Yeah, I think my book is starting to become a high fantasy borderline epic fantasy because I would like to keep a document of my world.
Yeah, and there's nothing wrong with having it be epic fantasy. I'm just keeping in mind, like, certain people like or don't like certain things. If you have average fantasy, I'd say a couple words, and I would often, I would not say often, I would always italicize those words, so that way they know they're from another language. That way they can follow along, even in regular. Like, I was currently working with a client recently who had a Cuban, I believe. She was Cuban. Puerto Rican. There we go. I was like, what is it? Spanish. The point is, she spoke partially Spanish. And so every time she spoke any sort of Spanish word, it was italicized, because that way it made it easier to the reader to realize that this was a Spanish word, even if they didn't know Spanish. Because not everyone knows Spanish, right? And same thing here. Not everyone's going to know your language inside and out perfectly. So I would say make sure it's italicized, and a couple sentences is okay if you're going high fantasy or epic fantasy. If you're average fantasy, kind of like Keeper of the Lost Cities or Harry Potter, I'd say limit it to a couple words.
Okay.
So, depends on the vibe, I guess is the best way to explain that.
Okay.
And other question, because you said you had many.
My brain's trying to remember them.
That's okay.
I was like, my brain said no to functioning today.
I feel that.
Yeah. Usually my brain can't function, but today it was just extra.
Your brain was just like, what is this functiones? I feel that.
So, what if you have like, so, I am so sorry.
You're
I
okay.
can't.
You're alright. No worries.
So I have multiple different types of races in my
Yes.
story. Would I have to make a language for each one of them, or would it be okay if I just did like one or two?
So long as you do kind of a D&D thing where they have a common language, that's fine. If they don't have a common language that they speak, then yes, you should probably do
Yeah.
all different languages. In some ways, it would be good to have all different languages just to show the cultural difference, but you don't necessarily have to use all the different languages. Just like, for example, in today's day and age, we have lots of people who speak Spanish and Japanese and Chinese and all the languages of the universe, insane amounts, right? But that doesn't mean that I know all of those languages or I'm going to encounter all of those languages. Like living in the US, more than likely I might run into Spanish. That's about it. I've sometimes run into other languages, but it's very rare, right? So I would also say it depends on whether or not they're traveling across countries or if they're staying in the same country. Because if they're staying in the same country, then more than likely they're going to be speaking whatever the base language is there. And so there's not going to be an issue with that. And they might run into a couple people who speak a different language, but it's usually going to be one different language. If they run into a bunch of people speaking a bunch of different languages, explain why that is. For example, in New York, when there was the whole giant immigrant thing during the melting pot kind of era, right? That would be much more common that you'd walk down the streets of New York and hear 7 different languages at once, right? But that's because of the way it is. So I would say, think about your world, think about whether or not they would even run into the other languages, or if more than likely they wouldn't, contextually. Does that make sense?
Okay. So
Yeah, go ahead.
I had it in my brain, but then I lost it.
That's okay.
So writer's block.
Writer's block, the funnest question.
Yeah, so I keep on getting stuck at a certain part. I think it's partially because
Mhm.
it's boring, or I don't really
Okay.
know how to progress it.
Mhm.
How can I push past it or get an idea of what I want to have?
Depends on the reason for your writer's block. That's the unfortunate thing about this, is that writer's block almost has to be diagnosed. Writer's block is one of those terms where it's a very generic term for a lot of things. It's kind of like when the doctor goes, oh, you're sick. Sick with what? A cold, flu, COVID, cancer, like so many things can be sick, right? And it's the same thing with writer's block. Writer's block is a very generic term for a lot of different problems you can run into that block your ability to write. So it depends on why you are stuck. Right now it sounds like it is because you don't feel motivated to write or feel motivated to write that specific scene. Am I correct?
Yeah, and
Okay.
also I'm just like, basically what's happened is like prologue, the first chapter, main character's birthday. Then I get a bit stuck because they're going to have a conversation with their friend,
Mhm.
and during that, the main character's little sister gets lost,
Mhm.
and then she randomly comes back with 2 random people, and then that's where I get stuck because I want those 2 random people to basically join their party, like in a D&D
Okay.
party, but I don't.
And
know
you're
how to
not
do it.
sure why they would join? Is that part of the problem? Or is it just like you don't want to have to act out all this talking?
No, I love the talking. I guess I'm just part of it's motivation. Part of it
Mhm.
is just I'm just trying to figure it out, and I'm just not sure how to figure it out.
That's fair. I would say that with figuring out how the group dynamic works, why would they join the group? Do you know that? If you don't know that, that might be why you're stuck. Because ultimately, trying to force someone to be a part of a group is really hard to do in a story and can feel very awkward if you're just like, and now we're friends, yay, right? But if that's not necessarily your concern, like I'm not sure, is that your concern that you're not sure what their motivations are for joining the group?
Yes and no. I have a slight idea, but I
Okay.
can't even get to that part because basically I usually get stuck on chapter 2.
Mm-hmm.
Because as they're able to join a group, and I want them to get to this point, but what happens? Because I don't want them to just magically appear there. I don't know what goes on from basically point A to point B.
Mm-hmm. It's tricky with those types of situations because it sounds like ultimately you may not know your characters well enough yet. Correct me if I'm wrong.
Well, it's just because a part of me is like, this is boring. I just want you to skip to the action point
Okay,
or more
boring.
interesting.
That's important. Why is it boring to you?
I guess it's just because my brain just has so many different ideas I want to already get to, but I can't until I get to this part.
What would make it more interesting to you?
I'm not sure because I have basically this, like.
What is interesting for you to write?
It depends on my mood, honestly. That's
Well,
the
I would
problem.
say go with your mood then, because ultimately that can actually sometimes lead to really great places. For example, with me, I have a problem writing just normal dialogue where two people are sitting down and being like, that sucked, bro, and the other person's like, yeah, fighting monsters does suck sometimes. That's boring to me. I'm like, boo. Or alternatively, drama's also really boring to me. You killed my sister? Yes, I did. I hate that. I can't. I just, ugh. And so I feel that.
That
I
really
can't
made
write
me
scenes
think of
like
a Hallmark
that.
movie for some reason.
But sometimes you really need those scenes. So find a way to make them interesting to you at the moment. For example, for me, those really, really dramatic scenes can be much more interesting to me if they get interrupted halfway through by something else. And so they can't fully get into the drama. Instead, it's just like approaching drama and run away from the drama. That actually is much more interesting to me, and so I can get past that a lot better.
Or having the characters and the souls running away from the drama. It's like, you Susie. Nope, I'm out. Bye.
I can't do this. Yes,
Yeah.
exactly. Like,
Or
I can't do
Rachel,
it.
it's so much
Yes.
fun.
I like adding random things, but I don't want to do that too often. Like, I have a scene, I'm like, oh, I'm just going to add a random fuzzy potato. But I'm not sure if that would be okay.
I would
but-
say
Sage potato?
if it builds,
What?
here's the thing that you need to keep in mind. 3 things that build a scene: plot, character, and world development. You want to have at least 2 of those. As long as you have at least 2 of those, you're golden. You don't necessarily need to have it always be perfectly all 3 or always be perfectly related to the plot. As long as it has at least 2 of those things in the scene, you're good. That being said, other things that you can do in general are find ways and things that would make it more interesting to you. So for example, for me, sometimes it is much more interesting to me if the characters are going through some sort of fantasy-based thing, because then they can talk about their emotions in a fantasy way, saying like, I feel so connected to this magical knife, but I know that it was owned by this haunted ghost or whatever. That makes it so much more interesting than just saying like, I really think that my powers are kind of lame and it sucks. That's not nearly as interesting.
I have trouble, like, basically traveling scenes.
Traveling
Especially
scenes.
if...
You don't have to write traveling scenes.
Get
Let
that-
me just say it right now. The Hobbit was entirely too long for that reason. Gasp! I know. Everyone
you
loves The
have a
Hobbit.
point.
It's a classic. Oh no. Yeah, no.
You
Seriously,
really
it was
have a
entirely
That's
too
what I
long
was
for that
reading
reason.
it. Like, after, reading, 10 chapters of traveling,
Like,
it's like,
you got to make the traveling interesting. So, for example, I actually recently worked with a client's second book, and she has to do a lot of traveling because of the fact that they have to get to another realm in order to find this specific stone that is going to help get rid of evil magic dude. And I know that was very vague, but point being that they have to do a lot of traveling because they don't know how to teleport very well yet, because they're new magic users. So as a result, they can't just teleport wherever they want. They gotta walk. And so a lot of times I would say the best thing you can do is develop the story while they are walking. If you aren't developing the story while they are walking, skip it.
So, like, would it be okay if I, like, did a time skips? Like, okay, now it's night.
Absolutely. The only problem that you're going to run into is if there was anything plot important or character important or world building important that happened during that travel scene, then you do need it. For example, in this specific case, she had a lot of travel scenes that had to deal with one of the characters nearly dying of an infection. That's
Cute.
important. That's important to talk about, right?
Did you say cute?
Well, to be fair, they were lovey-dovey about it, so it was
Yeah,
kind of
it's
cute,
adorable.
actually.
I rested my case.
But
I mean, you're not wrong.
that being said, it was very important, right? right? That she'd take care of him and that they developed this relationship along the way. But if he hadn't have been injured, she totally could have been just like, moving on.
Yeah, right? No, it's
You had your hand raised.
Another fun thing to do with
Yes.
traveling scenes, I was watching a TV show forever ago,
Mhm.
and they were waiting by the side of the road for no reason. And instead of like skipping that, the screenwriters decided to have them play like all these stupid games, like rock paper scissors,
Mhm.
and they were like having a competition between like whatever, and it was
Oh, yeah.
like really fun. So if you wanna add
Character
some,
development through
Yeah.
doing like
just
various
goofy
things.
little fluff in
Yes.
there. It's so much fun.
I had that was
Yeah,
an
Edge.
I like the fluff because I also there was another scene that she had that it did end up being important to the plot later on, but it felt very fluffy in the moment because basically this one guy, he kind of reminds me of you but a dude in the regard that he's constantly going like, I want to adopt all the small creatures.
That's not me. Why would you say that?
And so it was funny because they had this scene as they're walking through the woods and he's like, I want it. I want it. I want it.
That's
yes.
me when we're in the car and we drive past a farm.
And then finally he does actually adopt one of the small creatures. But
Okay, now I need to read this book right now.
But yes, point being that it's really can be super fun to do.
I need
those
to
types
adopt
of
this
travel.
character.
I need to adopt this character. He does need to be
I
adopted.
want
He's a
it.
cinnamon roll.
No one wants it.
But yes, point being, that traveling scenes can be incredibly interesting. However, they can also be incredibly boring. If you find that they are boring and they aren't developing character, they aren't developing the plot, they aren't developing the world, then skip it. Ultimately, it's not necessary to go crazy with the travel scenes. I know that The Hobbit has given us this like intense expectation of travel scenes, but ultimately they need to be serving a purpose in the story.
The Hobbit should have 3 pages.
3 pages of just we
That's
walking.
Yeah.
And
That's
walk.
basically
And walk.
So if you're like, I would say don't skip any character development because it sounds like if they're just barely meeting these people, at least have them have some character development, and then like maybe one of them tells a joke or something like that, and then you leave it off on that, and then you time skip to the evening.
Until,
Like-
you open up the stuff, it's like,
Okay, now I need to look up cheesy jokes.
But the point being that like
oh
in
my
general,
gosh, if you need a dad joke, I have set. I'm so good.
But point being that I would say don't skip anything important, but if it's not important, you can absolutely skip the travel scene. if that is a concern. But yes, as far as the book goes, it is called Meeting Twilight by Arlen Carmen. It is on the first book is on Amazon. I don't know if the second one has come out yet or if she's still working on processing the edits I gave her last month.
I need to write this out. Okay, Meeting Twilight.
Yes, Meeting Twilight by Arlen Carmen, spelled with 2 A's at the beginning. But yes.
Another one from my books that I want to read. I'm gonna have a whole notebook filled.
You're just like
My
the to
Lord
be read
Morning
list.
cannibalism?
TBR.
Wait, that's crazy. Eating Twilight.
Anyway, so that being said, do you guys have any other questions since today is a question and answer day? Yes.
I do.
'Kay.
What's the deal with unreliable narrators? Like, how do you pull that off?
How do you pull it off?
Yeah.
Okay, cool. Because I was like, you have so many questions about unreliable narrators. they are a mystery. What do you mean by how do you pull that off? How do you pull it off in a way people like? How do you pull that off? Period. Like.
All of it.
All of it.
All of
Okay.
it.
So, the main thing I would say is with unreliable narrators, don't just drop the narrator halfway through. A lot of people like to start with an unreliable narrator, and then they get bored, and then they drop the unreliable narrator. If you're gonna commit to it, commit to this unreliable narrator. Second, I would say don't make them too unreliable. The reason we like unreliable narrators is because we never know what's coming out of their mouth, if it's lie or truth. However, if they're always lying, then they're no longer a fun, unreliable narrator. We're just like, bro, I can't trust you for anything.
So basically, Lucas.
So you have to partially trust them. You have to have them tell just as many truths as they tell lies. Because of the fact that way you can develop a sense of trust, and then the reader feels much more interested, and they're like, darn, you lied to me? But at the same time, they're like, but you also told me the truth about X, Y, and Z, so I can't be too mad at you. So I would say the best thing to do with unreliable narrators is keep it inconsistent as to whether or not they're telling the truth or a lie, but keep it consistent as to why they are lying or telling the truth. So inconsistency is important. They tell as many truths as lies. But if they constantly are lying about one thing, keep that consistent. Don't just have them be like, I'm going to lie about this 1 second, and then 2 seconds later I'm going to tell you the truth about this. Same topic.
Unless if that's how it is.
Right, but why would they tell you the truth all of a sudden? There needs to be a reason for them to divulge that truth. Otherwise, it just feels like they're completely all over the place, just like, who is this person? So having a thing that they like are purposely keeping secret from the reader in some ways can be kind of fun, because of the fact that then you're extra developing that unreliability by saying, this guy never seems to tell the truth about this specific topic. Why is that? And it then makes the reader more intrigued, right?
Yeah.
Because you're like, why does he want to lie about this thing? Why do they feel that way? I would also say the best way to do this would be third person omniscient or third person limited. It is doable in first person, but it's a lot harder in first person because of the fact that then we don't get to see that they are unreliable, because from their point of view, it is reliable.
Yeah.
And then they just seem like a reliable, possibly bad person. That being said, unreliable narrators, part of their intrigue is also their charisma. The ability to lure you in with a story and make you feel for them, kind of like Alcatraz. Within that first chapter, he is very unreliable about his information.
Oh yeah.
However, you also feel kind of bad for him because he's just like, I just wanted to make a pot of ramen and I set everything on fire. Like, you immediately hear that and you're like, oh, buddy. Like, you want to give him a hug. And so in some ways, even though he's unreliable, he also has this charisma that makes you want to help him and want to listen to him. So it's important to also develop a charismatic relationship with your reader that makes them want to go, oh, buddy, and give them a hug. Because ultimately, if you're just like, I'm a psychopathic killer,
Wait,
no.
what?
I don't want to read about you. You're scary. Give us a reason to love them. Even if they are a psychopathic killer, maybe they are only killing people that they think are bad people. Maybe they are only killing people that are cold cases that were never solved. Maybe they are trying to find their mother's murderer. Like, I don't know.
They only kill people that killed their dog.
But point being that they need to have a reason that they are likable, in spite of the fact that they as a person are not likable, if that makes sense.
Cool. Yep. Awesome.
Alright, was that helpful?
Yes.
Cool. Alright, any other questions regarding fictional writing? Serious questions, please.
Yeah, Yes, some non-serious questions still.
If you don't have any questions, I do have a list of questions that I can start going through because I do have a bunch. Do we want to go to the list?
I have one more question. How do
Okay,
you pick
cool.
a cute couple?
Cute couple.
I'm writing a married
Excellent
couple.
question.
And it's really cute, but like I'm not sure if it is.
You're like,
But
I'm
if it's you writing, then
unsure.
it's not.
I would say,
Shut up.
I would say, first of all, have beta readers, and especially beta readers of the actual dynamic you are writing. For example, if they are, like you said, a married couple, make sure you have a couple married couples read it. If they are a young married couple, make sure you have young married couples read it. If they are a young lesbian couple, make sure you have some young lesbians read it. Like, that kind of thing. Just in general, whatever your couple dynamic is, try to find someone who is similar, so that way when they read it, they can say, that's unrealistic, or alternatively, yeah, that's about right. So that will help give you feedback. But starting it in the first place, I would say do what you want to see, because ultimately, readers like reading about what they wish they had, right? And so you write about what you wish you had if you were in that situation. If you were in this specific situation, what would you want? Would you want your spouse to be super forgiving and understanding? Would you want your spouse to be the type that's like, they hurt you, they die? Like, what kind of relationship would you want from that person? And ultimately, when you create that, your readers who like that same thing will come in droves because they will relate to it.
Sweet. Awesome.
All right, any other
We're
questions?
gonna have so much fun.
Yes.
How do you write? Trying to phrase it. Basically,
Fair enough.
romance in stories without cringing.
romance in stories without cringing. So you mean not cheesy?
No, I don't mean cheesy. It's just I find writing romance is hard.
Okay, why is it hard to you?
I don't know.
Use Hiccup and Astrid as a
You're like, this is my dream couple.
Right?
But anyway, as far as writing romance in your stories,
Or at least how to do it properly without, I guess, without making it cheesy, like you said.
don't watch Hallmark. First of all,
Dude, all of a sudden Hallmark.
unless you want to do Hallmarky, in which case
No.
then do it, but that's your choice. There are people who enjoy Hallmark, and there's nothing wrong with that. But just know that Hallmark is 99% of the time
The same plot.
over-dramatized, the same plot. It has a lot of things that make it so that when you watch it, it's just not real. You're sitting there going like, if they were a real couple, this wouldn't work. If this were real people, this wouldn't function.
Because there's
Um,
two characters.
Yeah.
You know Garrett and
Yes.
Aaron. I want to make that work in my story, but I'm not sure how because my main character.
Question:
is-
are they the main couple or a side couple?
What do you mean by that?
Is the main character dating them?
Yes.
Okay, that makes them a main couple. A side couple would be like the main character's best friend is dating someone else.
Would be
Example:
like
Harry
Ron and
Potter with
someone.
Ron and Hermione. Whereas with Harry Potter, every relationship that he has is a main couple relationship because of the fact that he is the main person.
Did Harry date Hermione?
No.
everyone wanted that.
At the book, so I saw one over like.
Same.
He did not date Hermione. They did have one scene where they were like comforting each other and everyone thinks it's romantic, but they were honestly just like being bros. But that being said, but I can see why that's confusing because it does often come off as romantic. A lot of people assume that just because you're kind to someone in a specific way, that's romantic. That's not necessarily true. Anyway, moving forward.
Yep.
With writing romance, it is incredibly hard to do if you have not experienced it. That is the first thing I will say right off the
Yeah,
bat.
that's gonna be quite hard for me then.
It is not impossible
Oh, Michael,
though.
Michael, you
It's
need
not
Michael.
impossible, for sure.
No.
I have definitely had writers who have never experienced, who specifically said, I've never experienced romance, and yet they write it beautifully. Because of the fact that they've learned a lot of different things about what romance looks like and how it functions.
They're both,
So unfortunately, the best thing you could do is
but not around each
research.
other.
Okay, because
Because of the fact that let's put it this way. When I was in high school, I tried to write a romantic couple in an actual story. I know, shocking.
wait, is this the one from you or a different one?
There is that. We're moving on.
Yes, I don't know why you did that.
I know I did it, but it's because I'm a dork. Anyway, moving forward.
I'm good to hear.
So, I'm talking about a different story. With that story, I was specifically writing this couple because of the fact that I just felt like it felt natural in the story. I was like, this just makes sense. I don't know why, but it makes sense to me in the story, so I'm gonna go with it. My gut says they need to be in love. And whenever I had other people read it, they generally were like, this is cute, but it just doesn't feel right. There's a certain chemistry that's just missing because of the fact that I'd never truly experienced love before. I had experienced like people having crushes on me and me kind of like being like, I guess we could date and have crushes on other people, but I'd never experienced actually being in love. And therefore, it was incredibly hard. Not impossible. I've always been told that it was decent, but it was not fantastic. That being said, that doesn't mean you can't write to a couple being in love incredibly well if you haven't experienced it. The main issue for me was that I didn't like reading books with romance as a main plot. I preferred reading books with romance as a subplot, which even though you can learn from
What
that.
part?
Kissing!
Oh yeah.
Anyway,
That's a lot of content.
you can learn a lot about romance and how to write romance in a fantasy side plot romance. However, it is a lot easier to learn about romance with a main romance plot romance. And I have learned, and before I even fell in love, there was a lot of times where I started reading romance books and I was like, huh, interesting. I didn't think of that before, and things like that. So, I would say the best thing you could do would be to read a couple romance novels that are obviously nice, appropriate romance novels, but I'm saying like romance novels in
That's
general.
what my mom
But romance novels in general would be, woo, that was terrifying.
That's my school computer, you don't.
Anyway, point being that can be incredibly helpful
You're right,
because
this
then
is
you're
password
seeing the romance from a
Yeah,
deeper dynamic
Yeah, so
level.
you're paying it.
Okay.
And so seeing it from that deeper level enables it so that you can more easily slip it into a side plot. Now, aside from just reading romance novels, I would also say a fantastic way to learn more about
Spy on
romance.
couples.
There is that. You can. However, I would also say, like I was telling her earlier, have the couple dynamic that you're looking for, read that, and see how they feel about it.
Okay.
Because they ultimately are going to know how they feel about it, which means they'll be able to help you know how to write it. I would also say it depends on the dynamic of the people. For example, if they're an incredibly flirtatious person, that's going to be a very different romance novel from if the person's like, I really, really like you, but I don't want to say anything. That is going to drastically change how the romance plot moves, because one is going to be like, I like you, and the other is going to be like,
It's like, homework, I can help you.
Yep. And sometimes people are oblivious too. I actually recently was.
I'm the oblivious one.
I was actually reading someone. I follow this person on Instagram who's writing their biography in graphic novel form, and it's actually very fascinating. But part of their biography, they were talking about when they first met their / dated their husband, and they were like, "Yeah, I really, need to find a church around here. You said there was an internship at your church, and I could totally use a ride." And he goes, "Yeah, John can help you with that." And she's like, "Don't."
She's like,
I'm that person oblivious.
I'm trying so hard.
So, if you direct me, otherwise I will not do it.
That does happen too. So I would also say figure out what type of people your characters are, and that is going to help you figure out what type of romance they will have.
And also, I was wondering, just how to make it work, because at the beginning, and main character basically hates this person. Basically, but it's one-sided. The hatred's one-sided and love's one-sided. How can I get the love both-sided?
Both-sided. The enemies to lovers plot.
It's like that, except the enemy is only for one person, and they are even enemies.
And they're just grumpy about it.
Yeah, it's just like, I don't like you, but fine.
That's an excellent question.
Yeah, because I want to, eventually they start realizing their feelings, but how do I get to that point? Because...
Take it slow. Don't rush things, especially if they do feel those very intense emotions towards that, because of the fact that if you rush into it, it's not going to feel organic. Rarely, if people genuinely are like, grr, towards another person, it's not going to be like, and now I love you 2 days later. Like, absolutely not. And if that's the case, you watch way too many Hallmark movies. But, that being said, point being, that if someone genuinely is kind of like grr towards that person, first of all, why are they grr towards that person?
Yeah,
why do they dislike them? Make that reason that they dislike them either go away because they misjudged them, or alternatively, if they didn't misjudge them, have it be so that they realize that their motivations were good, or alternatively that their good qualities outweigh their bad qualities, or even if they do have some bad qualities, they're working on those bad qualities being better, or if they remind them of a specific person that is not so great, have them realize that just because they remind me of that specific person that isn't great doesn't mean that they are that person. Then they don't deserve to be treated like they are that person, because they're not that person. All of the above can be good reasons for them being grr towards someone. Just make sure that they resolve those issues before they start having feelings for them.
Yeah, what about the other side of that? Because I know how I'm going to kind of...
Yeah.
Like, I know the reason why they're upset at the other person,
Yeah.
but the other person, right from the beginning, love at first sight.
I would say in that case, just continue to have them be very persistent. because
How do I do that
oftentimes
with also being I don't know how to say the word
subtle.
As being, I feel like you have to say be, but you don't.
Subtle. Anyway, so when you say subtle, do you mean that they are shy, or do you mean like they are sly?
What does sly mean again?
Sly means like, hey, I'm going to a party later. You should totally come. That's
Yeah,
not
definitely
saying.
sly,
That's
because
not
they have,
saying
like, a
directly. I want to hang out with you, but it is also saying if you go and I go, then we can hang out.
Because is the other person has like a smug
Mhm.
personality, so
Yeah.
probably sly would.
Sly. In that case, then I would say continue to have them trying to hang out with them, trying to get their attention, trying to get them to like them. However, ultimately failing until they work out their own issues on the other
Because the two
side.
characters, it's basically. Sorry, my brain keeps on pausing.
That's okay.
It's Irene and Garrett basically
Mhm.
in the TV, except Garrett's more smug.
I would definitely say then, like I said, have them be a flirt, but have them be sly about it. Have them be like I said, well, hey, I'm going to collect firewood, and you said you needed to gather berries, so we could go do that together. That kind of thing.
Hey, there's a dance tonight. I'm going. You should come too.
Like, it'd be good
Yes,
to chill.
shipping my characters before I even write them.
But yes, so that being said,
sorry.
typically I would say have them be incredibly persistent. If they genuinely have feelings for this person, they will continue to be persistent. However, keep in mind, they shouldn't be persistent to the point of being hurt. And what I mean by that is if the other character genuinely doesn't like them and is continuing to be mean to them,
He probably does.
They are being mean.
are they being teasing mean though, or genuine mean? Like, rude.
Like, she's not being mean, she's oblivious to, she's probably going to be oblivious to most of his attempts. I'm basing that off of me. But also, it's like, I don't like this dude, but she ain't gonna be rude about it.
Okay, good. Just because sometimes there can be options where the person is rude. If you are, I'm just gonna add this for the video, if you are writing a character that is intentionally rude towards the reader, have the persistent person give up at some point, and then the person finally realizes all they lost. And realizes
I'm
that
not
they
going to
shouldn't have
have
been
them be
mean.
rude.
However, if you're not gonna have them be rude, like in your scenario, I'm just adding it for the video. If you're not going to have them be rude, then I would say just continue to have them be persistent. Continue to have them be like, you know, I really care about you, and I hope that one day you will care about me too.
Yeah, and probably running through be like, wait, why? Just why? Not trying to be rude, but accidentally make up. That's
Right.
Like, she's not trying to, but it may come off as like
Oh,
that.
yeah, totally.
Like, I think the word is blunt.
Blunt. Blunt is a good word. All right. Any other questions that people have?
One has one. I do?
Just, since when did you read my mind? But anyway, we technically could end the video here because it is of appropriate length. Unless you guys have any more questions. Cool. Well, remember that all the scary stories for this year, 2024, are due on the 12th of October. If you don't get them in by the 12th, sorry, you're going to miss it. Next contest is going to be the first chapter contest that is completely free because it is run by me. It is also a limit of 6,000 words with a suggested minimum of 1,500 words. You can do less than that. Just keep in mind that I find that a lot of the times it's a lot easier to get your point across with more words. And you can though. Again, you can. I currently am like working on a story, and it's like I finished the short story and it's 293 words. So like
Dang.
you
That
can have
is
very short stories.
impressive.
I think you can have very short stories, and you can have very short chapters. 100%. Just keep in mind that it is not easy to do, and so that is not common.
Let's go.
Typically, I would say I have a really hard time making chapters shorter and making stories
Yeah.
shorter. Anyway,
Alright.
so the first chapter contest
what?
is due on the 30th
Like
of
the sheet?
November for this year of 2024. I'm just adding that for the video.
Okay.
And for the December contest, those will be due on the 21st of December because of the whole Christmas ordeal and whatnot. Remember, it is cozy mystery. That means that you can have any mystery of any sort. However, just keep in mind you gotta keep it cozy, aka more about the goofy antics of those solving the murder than the actual goriness of the murder. If you've ever seen Psych, think of Psych vibes, where it's more about them being dorks than it is about the murder. And the reason for that is because that way it feels more cozy. You're experiencing all the intensity of the murder and mystery while at the same time not dealing with it directly.
They're just like looking at the body and then like this one guy comes up and then he's like
You could do that. But that being said, with
why don't I have more?
with that, please just keep in mind that for those stories, obviously you want to get them in before the deadline. I really would love to see you all participate. If you have lost your form or need a new form, I can also get you one of those. I'm going to turn off the video now and we can just free write.
You ate your form?